Welcome to the Michigan Socialist Rifle Association Firearms 101 presentation. This is, I think, the third one, and we're trying to record it so, we don't have to do this live all the time. We can move on to other initiatives that we're trying to do. So, yeah, what will I learn? So, the aim of this presentation is to get you familiar with the basics of firearms. We don't assume that you come into this knowing anything. We're going to start from the ground and go up. It's not comprehensive. It's just meant to get you started. So hopefully this, makes you ask some questions and you can start exploring from there. And at the end, you should know enough to safely and legally identify, handle, fire, and store a range of common firearm types and ammunition. So, section one, I believe we'll have 5 or 6 sections. The first one is just understanding the basics. And for that, we need to ask, what is a gun? What even is a gun? A gun is a machine for putting cartridges in one end of a tube and smacking the back of them with something pointy. It is a machine. So the tube part is called the barrel, and the pointy thing is called the firing pin. So we have to explain bullets first, or cartridges, or rounds, or whatever you want to call them. Bullets are the metal chunk in this bottom right-hand diagram. It's the metal part of this entire, cartridge or round. You can use bullet for the entire thing as well. Nobody's going to be that picky, really. But cartridges send a small chunk of metal, the bullet, at a very high speed, damaging whatever you're aiming at. The way they work is it's a self-contained cartridge. So you've got the case, the brass case, and, and in the back there is a primer. It contains a priming compound that when it's struck by the firing pin, it causes a really small explosion. That ignites the powder charge, the gunpowder in the case behind the bullet. The chemical reaction in that causes gases to expand behind the bullet, and it pushes the bullet out of the case and then through the barrel and then to wherever you're aiming. So we have 2 different types of primers, 2 main different types really, rimfire and centerfire. Centerfire is what you'll see, I guess most often you would say. It's on, a variety of different cartridge types. You see a 45 auto here. It's on 5.56, 7.62. It's on basically everything. Rimfire, on the other hand, is for small, very small caliber type cartridges. You'll see them mostly on 22 LR. Those are also very common, so you'll probably see both. Magazines next. So magazines, a lot of modern guns use them. Rather than having to manually load one round at a time, magazines will hold more rounds, usually under the gun. They're spring loaded so that when that first round is taken off the top and loaded in to the chamber, the second one comes up to take that first one's place, and so on and so on and so on until you run out. It's a lot quicker and more efficient than having to load each one separately. Clips and magazines are not the same. A lot of people tend to use those interchangeably, but they're not the same. We saw magazines were kind of, its own little construction. It held all the cartridges inside, and they were, covered. Clips are pretty exposed. You can see here they just really hold the rounds together so that you can push them in to the gun. Whatever gun it is. In the middle, we have an SKS. On the right, we have an M1 Garand. It's mostly used with older guns with permanently attached magazines, so you can't take the magazine out and load a new one. You have to use these clips to load it through the top. And in some cases, like the M1 Garand here, you push the clip in as well. And then after the last round is fired, it either ejects out the top in the case of the Garand, or it'll eject out the bottom or fall out the bottom in the case of like Mannlicher style clips. So usually you'll find those on older guns though. So if you're buying something modern, you don't really need to worry about that. So we talked about cartridges very slightly. We talked about magazines and clips a little bit. Now we kind of get to the construction of a gun. We put it all together. So the most basic parts of a long gun, and a long gun is exactly what it sounds like. It's a gun that is long. So shotguns, rifles, not pistols, is the most basic colloquial definition. We'll talk later about legal definitions, but for the meantime, it's we can call this a long gun. So we've got, working from the front back, we've got the barrel, remember the tube that the bullet comes out of. We've got the chamber, which is the back end of the barrel that holds the cartridge in place. It's usually thicker because that's where the highest pressures are. We've got the hammer, which will hit the back of the firing pin and push it forward, hitting the primer, igniting the cartridge. The trigger, which releases the hammer, and we've got the stock, the thing you put against your shoulder, makes it a little more bearable to shoot. And this long gun we have here is a break action. It doesn't have a magazine. You load each shot manually. Uh, I mean, it's pretty self-explanatory. Break action, it breaks in half, right? Around ejects, you put a new one in. And after that, we can move on to a little more complex guns. Bolt actions are kind of the next evolutionary step, you could say. The firing pin assembly is moved to a bolt now instead of being its own thing and being struck by the hammer. There really isn't a hammer in this action. It's more of a striker system, and we can see that on the bottom right diagram. The bolt is that long metal tube, I guess, that moves backward and forward, pulls a round out of the internal magazine and feeds it into the chamber. So the striker system is that spring system in the center there. The firing pin you can see at the front. It's the long metal rod, thin metal rod. And what the striker is, it's essentially under spring tension. So it's pulled back when you load a cartridge, and when you pull the trigger here, this sear, which is the top part of this T-looking thing, that gets dropped, and the striker assembly releases the spring tension, moves the firing pin forward, and hits the primer. So a little bit different here. We also have two new parts, the extractor and the ejector. The extractor is a claw that grips the rim of the cartridge and pulls it out of the chamber. And if we go back, actually, this break action does have an extractor at the base of the chamber. That's essentially when you open the action, whether it's pulling the bolt back or breaking the long gun, what the extractor is going to do is it's a claw, and it grips the cartridge under the rim, and it pulls it out. It also usually is under spring tension or some kind of tension. The ejector pushes the spent casing out and away from the gun. These work in tandem, kind of, as like a leveraging mechanism. So the ejector on some guns is literally just a metal piece that sticks out on the opposite side of the extractor, and so it kind of flings it backwards. Uh, so we also have a new term here, the receiver. We talked about hammers, the hammer, the barrel, the trigger, the chamber, all that in the last slide, and now we have a receiver. It's essentially what everything is connected to. The firing mechanism, the chamber, the internal magazine, the bolt, all of that is connected to the receiver, and it is legally the gun. So we'll again get into this later a little bit deeper, but we have a new term. Next, we have tube magazines. Lever action and pump action are the most common tube magazine guns, or guns that utilize the tube magazine. It's, again, what it sounds like. It's a long tube under the barrel usually that stores cartridges so that when you cycle the action, whether you pump it or whether you push the lever forward and back, it ejects around and feeds a new one into the chamber. Both of these systems use a kind of like elevator type system. When you cycle the action, the shotgun or the pump action shotgun is a little bit different in that it uses claws, and the lever action uses more of like an elevator, but it's the same concept, right? As you eject the spent round or the spent casing, that elevator, the claw kind of pushes it out of the way and feeds a new round into the chamber. Next, we have revolvers. These use a rotating cylinder to store additional cartridges. It cycles the action when the hammer is pulled back, which rotates the cylinder, lines up a new round, and then you can pull the trigger and the hammer will fall and fire the round. In some revolvers, the firing pin is attached to the hammer, like in this diagram here. It's all part of one system. So we've also got single and double action revolvers. The single action, you have to pull the hammer back every time. So the trigger will only drop the hammer. The double action, it does two actions, right? It pulls the hammer back and drops it, and it cycles the cylinder. So double action, you can manually cock the hammer, or you can just pull the trigger. If you just pull the trigger and don't manually cock the hammer, since it is doing two actions, it's going to be a little heavier of a pull. And we have semi-automatics, semi-automatic rifles in this slide. So the principle here is instead of manual energy being expended to cycle the action or to load a new round, what happens here is the gases generated by the cartridge that are in the barrel before the bullet leaves the barrel fully, that's used to cycle the action. So essentially what happens with this AR-15 platform looking image is before the bullet exits the barrel, the gases behind the bullet, between the bullet and the chamber, are fed through a little opening, I guess you could call it, in the top of the barrel at a certain point, and it actuates really a piston that pushes the bolt back and then cycles the action. Um, there are slightly different systems to this, long stroke gas piston, short stroke gas piston, there's direct impingement, but it all operates on essentially the same principle, is that it uses the gases from the cartridge that was just fired to cycle the action and load the next cartridge. So in this case, we have one shot per trigger pull, semi-automatic. If it was fully automatic, it would be as many shots as you could take with, well, if you hold the trigger down, it will keep firing. Those are generally not legal for civilian use unless you like own your own gun shop. So we won't be covering those. So now we've got more complex, again, more complex guns, semi-automatic handguns. This system is different than the semi-automatic rifle system. They can either be hammer fired or striker fired, and they have different ways of delaying the action using the pressure of that cartridge that was just fired to load a new one. So there's rotating barrels. There are quite a few ways that these systems work. Um, so for the striker fired pistols on the top here, uh, we have a Glock system, uh, semi-auto handgun. It uses an internal mechanism called a striker, like we saw in the bolt action, to hit the firing pin. So same principle. You can see the striker being held back under spring tension here, and then once the sear is released, it lurches forward, hits the primer, detonates the cartridge. And below we have a hammer-fired semi-auto handgun. This uses an external hammer to hit the back of the firing pin, which is also here under spring tension, but in the opposite direction. Um, and so, yeah, so now we can move on to, yeah, fully automatics. We go over it slightly here, but again, probably won't need to worry about it unless you're planning on owning your own gun shop. They're legal to own without a ton of money and paperwork. So, yeah. Gun safeties. This is a very important part of Firearms 101. we have internal and external safeties. So you might not always be able to see a safety on your firearm. External safeties, of course, are the most visible. It's a button or a lever on the outside of the gun that prevents the gun from firing in some way, usually denoted by S or F for safe and fire, or a red dot for danger, like fire. Um, and then we have internal safeties. So internal safeties are a part of the internal mechanism of the gun that helps prevent it from firing when it's not supposed to. It in some way, prevents the gun from firing, usually by preventing the firing pin from moving forward. These are firing pin blocks, transfer bars, or grip safeties. Grip safeties are the most visible. Looks like a little bit of a chunky lever on the back of the grip of a handgun, which you have to depress before you can pull the trigger and release the firing pin. Now we can move on to cartridge identification. Um, Caliber is one common way of measuring the cartridge. It's the diameter of the bullet in 1/100ths of an inch. So 45 caliber is 45 hundredths of an inch diameter bullet. Some rounds will also have more to their name than just this measurement. So the caliber alone is not enough. Here in the picture, we can see a 50 caliber AE and a 50 BMG. Both are 50 caliber, but I don't think you would want to fire one of those in a gun made for the other. Next, we have the metric system. Um, More civilized rounds are measured in millimeter. I personally like this measurement system because it gives you both the diameter and the length. So you have less of a chance to mix up cartridges. For example, we have 9 by 19, 7.62 by 39, 5.56 by 45. Sometimes the same cartridge can be known by different names. So 9 by 19 is also known as the 9mm Luger, 9mm Parabellum. It's all the same thing. There might also be a letter or acronym added to the end of the name to denote something special, 7.62 by 54R. I don't remember if R means Russian or rimmed, but the cartridge does have a little bit of a rim on the outside, so it makes sense. 5.56mm NATO, same thing as 5.56 by 4.5. So now we can talk about bullet types because it's not just the cartridge that can change. Um, there are different rounds that you might want to use in different circumstances. So we've got FMJs, which are very common, full metal jacket. It's the quintessential bullet if you've ever seen one. It's just, the casing and the lead, or the lead encased in copper. The core, which is usually lead, is surrounded by another layer of another metal, again, usually copper. It's cheaper, used for practice, and you know, yeah. So next we have hollow point. The tip is carved out. Upon hitting a soft target, the bullet expands, creates a wider wound channel, and delivers more energy because it stops quicker. Usually used for self-defense. So even these two bullets, more or less the same, but they're usually used in different circumstances. Case materials, so we've got brass is the most common. It can be the most easily reloaded. It's pretty malleable compared to other metals used in case materials. It doesn't dent as easily as steel does, which is our next bullet point, steel. It's used in cheaper ammunition or in Russian cartridges. It's very common, such as the 7.62 by 39, which is used in the SKS and AK platforms. And then we have aluminum. Usually you can find this in defensive handgun ammunition. I cannot speak to the reloadability of steel or aluminum, but I'm sure there are forums and forum after forum after forum of discussion on this. Now we have shotgun shells, identifying shotgun shells. This can get complicated, so we'll just kind of stick with the basics here. Shotguns typically send multiple projectiles called shot that spread out to increase your hit probability. In the bottom center image here, we can see birdshot and buckshot are two examples of sending multiple projectiles downrange. The slug we will talk about in a second. So Here, yeah, the birdshot, it's a lot of smaller BBs, and buckshot, fewer larger ones, or you can have one single projectile, which is called a slug. So these cartridges, of course, look different. They're usually enclosed in a plastic shell called a wad, which leaves the barrel with the shot when it's fired. It acts as the separator between the powder charge and the projectile, because if you didn't have some type of separator there, the gas would just escape through the spaces in that shot. Slugs, for that reason, are sometimes not enclosed, but usually still have a wad between the slug and the powder. Um, and if the slug is enclosed in plastic, it's called a sabot. Little tidbit there. The entire shell is also then enclosed in plastic, and it has a metal base. Still uses the same principle, right? We still have a primer, we still have the powder charge, we still have that case there, even though it's, I mean, mostly plastic now, and the projectile. Shotgun shells are not measured in caliber or millimeters. They're measured in gauges. It's a little odd. For example, 12 gauge means that the diameter of the barrel is the same as the diameter of a sphere of lead that weighs 1/12 of a pound. It's a pretty archaic system. So you can think of it as how many lead spheres the same diameter as the barrel weighs a pound. If the answer is 10 lead spheres, then it's 10 gauge. If it's 20 lead spheres, then it's 20 gauge. So usually the smaller the gauge, the bigger the shell, or the wider, bigger in diameter the barrel. The most common shell sizes are 10 gauge, 12 gauge, 20 gauge, 28 gauge, and wait for it, 410 caliber, because why be consistent? They also come in different lengths, like 2.5 inch or 3 inch, and not all shotguns can shoot all lengths. So you should probably check your owner's manual, and if you do not have an owner's manual, check online. Usually this type of information is easily found. Make sure you know the make and model, the year would be helpful. More on shotgun loads. So not all birdshot, not all buckshot is the same. Um, it's based on the size of the pellets contained in the shell. The bigger the shell and the smaller the pellets means more individual pellets per shot. It makes less sense than the gauge system, so it's easiest to just use a chart. Some ranges, if you're planning on shooting skeet at a range or patterning your shotgun, some of them do not allow shot above or below a certain shot size. So that's another thing to check before you go, you know, drive 45 minutes or something out to a range and then have to turn back around and go home. Sights. Sights are made to make sure that you hit what you're aiming at. Iron sights are, I mean, again, what they sound like. It's usually two pieces of iron built onto the gun itself, whether it's a hole or a notch or a post, and they need to be aligned, brought up to your eye and aligned with each other to aim correctly. Next, we have red dots and holographic sights. These will usually display a dot or a crosshair that's projected onto some glass that you can look through and line everything up. Um, they are not always red. I've heard that a lot of people can use blue as well if red is hard to see. Green is also a common choice. And then we have scopes. So scopes are normally magnified. It's a tube with lenses and a crosshair that you, again, bring up to your eye. And yeah, usually it's magnified. So we've got some examples here. Two on the left, two on the left and one in the middle. Those are all iron sights. The two on the left specifically use an aperture back sight, and the one in the middle uses a notch. So they align slightly differently, but the principle is the same. And then the two on the right are holographic / red dots. I'm not an expert, so if they are holographic and not red dots, please don't yell at me. And here we have scopes. So again, they provide some type of magnification. Usually you'll find these on hunting rifles. I'm going to take a second stop here as well and say that if you do have questions as we're going through this, we have moderators in the chat. They should be able to answer any questions that you have. I do not have the chat pulled up, so I won't be able to see them. At the end, I will reread the questions though, if we have any, just so that we can, get through them twice. So, one more thing, rifled barrels. Uh, Rifled barrels are a technique, I guess you could say, that stabilizes the bullet as it travels through the barrel and leaves it, so that it travels more straightly. If you've ever thrown a football, you know that if you spiral it, it throws a lot straighter than if you just throw without one. Um, the spiral grooves inside the barrel is called the rifling. Barrels that don't have it are called smoothbore. It's usually in shotguns, because rifling in a shotgun's case would make the shot spread too quickly. The BBs would kind of get trapped in those rifling grooves, and as it leaves the barrel, it would spin and spread out very quickly. Sabos do need rifling though. Okay, so that was the basics. Now we move on to the fun legal stuff. So be prepared for walls of text. So first, we'll try to go through some definitions, because it's very important to know how to define the firearm that you're talking about. If you want to buy a rifle and you accidentally buy a short-barreled rifle without paying the tax stamp, that's bad news, and we'll get into that later. So, what is a firearm? So, according to the ATF, or the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, any weapon, including a starter gun, which will or is designed to or may readily be converted to expel a projectile by the action of an explosive, the frame or receiver of any such weapon, any firearm muffler or firearm silencer, or any destructive device. So that's a lot. Moving on to the state of Michigan, it's regulated a bit differently. The federal government and the state government regulate firearms differently. They have different definitions. What might classify as an other federally might classify as a pistol in Michigan. So it's very important to know these things. Rifles, according to the ATF, are designed or intended to be fired from the shoulder and, quote, fire only a single projectile through a rifled bore for each single pull of the trigger. Rifles, per the state of Michigan, are again designed and intended to be fired from the shoulder and, quote, to use the energy of the explosive in a fixed metallic cartridge to fire only a single projectile through a rifled bore for each single pull of the trigger. A little bit different. This one specifies a fixed metallic cartridge. So what if you have a rifled muzzle loader that you have to manually add the charge and the lead shot yourself? That's not a fixed metallic cartridge. Is it still technically a rifle? There are a lot of gray areas. So I would recommend just doing your research before you purchase a particular firearm if it's at all obscure or not clear what it classifies as. More definitions. We've got the barrel length. The length of the barrel is very important. It matters to the federal government as well as the state. But the state also cares about the overall length of the rifle as well. Short-barreled rifles, which I mentioned earlier, it's a rifle having a barrel or barrels of less than 16 inches in length. So these are subject to different laws, different rules. The definition of a rifle includes, if you remember, it's designed or intended to be fired from the shoulder. So what happens if your barrel is less than 16 inches and you don't intend to fire it from the shoulder? What if it doesn't have a stock? If it's a 4-inch barrel? Usually that would classify as a pistol, but not in all cases. It's very confusing. I'm sorry. If I could change some of these things, simplify them, it would be great. But so that moves us on to pistols, according to the ATF. It's a weapon originally designed, made, and intended to fire a projectile or a bullet from one or more barrels when held in one hand and having a chamber or chambers as an integral part of or permanently aligned with the bores and a short stock designed to be gripped by one hand at an angle to and extending below the line of the bores. That's also complicated. Um, Pistols, according to the state of Michigan, it's a little more simple. A loaded or unloaded firearm that is 26 inches or less in length, or a loaded or unloaded firearm that is by its construction and appearance conceals itself as a firearm. Simpler, but more vague. So again, there are trade-offs and discrepancies. So that moves us on to ownership. Hopefully, now if you're planning to purchase a firearm and you know what it's defined as, you know, say it's a rifle and the barrel is longer than 18 inches and the overall length is longer than what I believe 26 inches, you're good. It's a rifle, you're safe. Now there are some restrictions on ownership and possession. So you can purchase, own, and or possess a rifle or a shotgun in the state of Michigan if you are a resident over the age of 18 and were not convicted of any felonies or domestic violence related misdemeanors. The state might issue exemptions for some convicted felons if they've fulfilled certain conditions. That can be, you know, serving your sentence or, you know, completing your parole, paying any relevant fines. That's something that you might want to inquire about if you're not sure. Whenever you purchase any firearm from a federal firearms licensed dealer, an FFL, you must go through a NICS background check. An FFL is really just any gun store, any, again, federal firearms licensed dealer. So you have to go through this NICS background check. These background checks are not required to purchase a rifle through a private sale, but if you do purchase one from like a bona fide gun store, right, you're going to have to go through one. They usually take 15 minutes. You just fill out your information, name, driver's license, some other things, and they'll get back to you. They just run it through, make sure you're good, and then you'll be able to buy your long gun there. You may purchase, own, and or possess a handgun in the state of Michigan if all the conditions above apply. However, to purchase a handgun from an FFL, you must be 21 years old or older. So there's a little bit higher of an age restriction on handguns, specifically from an FFL. However, if you purchase it through a private sale, you only have to be 18 or older. If you purchase a pistol from a private dealer, period, whether or not you're 18, 21, 45, you first have to fill out a private transfer form and pass a background check from the Michigan State Police. So the NICS background check is federal. Pistol purchase background checks are the Michigan State Police. A little bit different. The process usually goes, okay, you want to purchase a pistol or you want to sell a pistol. You go get a private transfer form from either your local police station or city hall or the sheriff's office or some type of local government building. You fill it out. You have either the buyer or the seller fill it out, and then you go from there. Transportation. This is something that gets overlooked in some courses, but it's very important because if you don't transport your firearms safely and legally, that can spell a whole lot of trouble. So how to transport guns legally? The best thing to do is to separate the ammo from the gun, both by vehicle compartment and by container, right? So, for example, what I always do is I have a separate trunk area. Again, maybe if you have a Jeep, this isn't very feasible because the trunk, quote unquote, is like in the same vehicle compartment. Anyway, what I always do is I keep my firearm in the trunk, and then in its own locked container, and then I keep my ammunition in the back seat, again in its own locked container. It's the best way to make sure that you're transporting things safely and legally. If you're unable to separate them by compartment, like I mentioned in a Jeep, you can lock both the ammo container and the gun case and just separate them by distance. You can put the ammunition, I don't know, in the front passenger seat and then the rifle and all the way in the back. That's just my 2 cents. I like to keep them as far away from each other as I can in case you get stopped, I don't know, for speeding or something. But But if you have a CPL, a concealed pistol license, you can transport a pistol without separating everything. You can keep it on your person. You don't have to remove the ammunition from the pistol. You can put it in your center console if you'd like, uh, but that comes with its own hurdles, I guess, and things that you should probably check into before you just put it in your pocket. So we have a couple miscellaneous legal notes. CPL, like I just mentioned, is the license, concealed pistol license. A CCW is a crime, carrying a concealed weapon. So there's a difference there. Some states do say that, oh, we have a CCW license, um, carrying a concealed weapon license. It varies by state, and the requirements vary by state as well. Muzzle loaders are not legally considered real guns. Um, it's a little bit weird, like I had mentioned earlier. The Michigan state definition for rifles is firing it through a fixed metallic cartridge. Apparently, this doesn't make them real guns if they're not in a fixed metallic cartridge. So, interesting little tidbit there. Section 3, safety. So, there are 4 main rules of gun safety, and you should know these by heart. You don't have to know them verbatim, but you should know the 4 principles by heart if you plan to be around any gun in the near future. You should, 1, treat all guns as if they're loaded, especially if you have not checked. If you see a gun lying on the table, even if it's locked open and there's no magazine, you should always cycle the action again, just make sure. 2, don't point your gun at anything you wouldn't want to shoot. Muzzle discipline, this is called muzzle discipline. That way, if an accident happens, no one gets hurt. So if you did not abide by rule 1 and check to see if they're loaded, but you don't point your gun at anything you wouldn't want to shoot, if it goes off, you've minimized, the damage here. 3, keep your finger off the trigger until you're ready to fire. Really, just don't touch it until your sights are lined up and you're sure that that's what you want to shoot. 4, be aware of your target and what's beyond it. I will also add what is above it, what is around it, what is in front of it. Bullets can go through things. They can also shatter, and they're made of metal, and so that metal can splinter and go flying in all sorts of different directions. They also come back down from the air. They bounce off rocks. They shatter on metal. They can come right back at you. So it's very important to know that, what's behind the target, what's in front of it, what's on either side, above, below. Just be aware of your surroundings. So, loaded. Assume that all firearms are loaded. Muzzle discipline. Do not point it at anything you don't want to shoot. Finger. Keep your finger off the trigger until you're ready to fire. Target. Know what is beyond and around your target. Gun storage. This is an overlooked part of gun safety. Guns are as dangerous when you're using them as when you're not using them, because if they're not locked up, you have no way to ensure that they're not being used when you're not using them. So goal-oriented storage is the best way to consider this. What are you trying to prevent? Are you trying to prevent theft or mishandling? Maybe you have small children in the house. You're going to want slightly different ways of storing your firearm, depending on what you're trying to prevent. Nothing is impenetrable. Safes are not impenetrable. Gun cabinets are not impenetrable. No matter how high end of a trigger lock you buy, it can be broken into. So just keep that in mind. Safes are a common way to go. You can get large ones that deter smash and grab burglars. You can keep your guns away from your kids by having this combination lock on many safes or a key. It can also provide a controlled humidity environment because, again, guns, firearms, they're machines. It's metal on metal. You don't want to have these things rust on you. If it rusts, it can become brittle. Guns operate in very high pressure. So if it becomes brittle and it's rusted a lot and you haven't taken it out in a while to shoot, and you shoot a hot round, one that has a lot, a very high pressure, bad things can happen. So some safes do provide humidity, controlled humidity environment. Some are also fire resistant. Trigger locks are very common. Usually they'll come with your gun if you buy one at a gun store. They prevent the gun from operating until it's removed. It literally just covers the trigger and doesn't let you pull it. um, and then there's deactivation, which isn't really talked about a lot. You can remove a part of your gun, like the firing pin, and then store that separately. It's best combined with other methods. So let's say you have a gun cabinet that's not very sturdy. It's got glass on it. Someone can smash it and take the gun out. You can remove your bolt, store that in a lockbox or something in a different area of the house, so that if someone does smash and grab, they won't be able to use it. Safety at the range. Safety, of course, is very important. Anywhere you're operating a firearm, you must always wear eye and ear protection at all times. This isn't only a range rule at every range, but it's a rule that you should always wear or always abide by if you're not at a range, like if you're on state land or something. Always wear eye and ear protection. It's not worth it to risk your hearing or your eyesight just because, I don't know, it's uncomfortable or you forgot to take them or something. That's very important. Obey the 4 rules that we talked about earlier. And you should also probably should also obey any range specific rules. A lot of ranges will have certain rules about calibers and cases. You know, a lot of ranges say it's an indoor range. They don't want you using steel case or steel core ammunition. The reasoning for that, I'm aware of, at least with the steel core, is that steel core, when it hits the berm in the back of the indoor range, it tends to spark or damage the berm. And if you're indoor and there's a lot of gunpowder residue and there's a spark, bad news bears. It's not good for anybody. Steel cases, I think it's the same reason. I'm not too aware of that one though. Um, there might also be separate ranges for long guns and pistols. So you can see, I don't know, the DNR range that I go to sometimes, they have a 100-yard uh, area, they have a 50-yard area, 25 yards, 15 yards. You can use rifles at the 100 and the 50-yard. You can use rifles and pistols at the 25, and you can only use pistols at the 15. So, something to check. Uh, Ranges, a lot of ranges also don't like you doing holster drills unless you're either the only one there or they might just not let you do it. Some clubs are okay with it, uh, but it kind of just it's a liability thing for them, right? If you are practicing holster drills and you've never done them before and your gun's not on safe and you pull it out, you accidentally hit the trigger, it's not good news. Uh, Lastly, you should always obey the RSO, the range safety officer. That's where they're working. They have your safety in mind. So, if they call you out, just politely say, okay, sorry, and move on. Some miscellaneous safety notes. We talked about caliber identification earlier. We mentioned the 5.56 by 45 millimeter cartridge. It's also measured in the caliber, right? So the diameter in inches, 223. 5.56 and by 45 is essentially the same thing as 223 Remington, but there is a very important difference. They operate at different pressures. So you can use 223 in a barrel designed for 5.56, but not the other way around. The 5.56 cartridge operates at a higher pressure. If you operate it in a barrel made for 223 Remington, like I had said earlier, with the brittle, the rust making the chamber brittle, some bad things can happen. It can damage your gun, and worst case scenario, it can blow up. There are barrels 223 Wild with a Y, WYLDE. Those are made to fire both. So, 223 Remington is okay out of a 5.56, but not the other way around. Similarly, 7.62 by 51, aka 7.62 NATO, can be used in a rifle chambered for 308, but not the other way around. Another one of those cases where there is a millimeter measurement and a caliber measurement for both, identical bullet types. Another one is always pattern your shotguns. Different loads act differently in different shotguns. So you'll want to take your shotgun to a range that has a patterning station and see what the load that you're using does at different distances, especially if you're going to use it for home defense. Um, you want to see how wide of a spread it is. If you're using it in home defense, you might not want the spread too wide to go in, if you shoot it, some shot might go into a different room. So it's just an important thing to know. The last thing, riding the hammer. You can kind of see this in some movies, some action movies, where the way that whoever's on screen will decock the pistol is to pull the trigger, but keeping your thumb on that hammer and slowly guiding the hammer down. It's not safe. It it can work, but you're essentially just firing the firing pin very slowly. When the hammer hits the back of that firing pin, it's still going to lurch it forward a little bit. You can have a misfire or a negligent discharge. So keep rule of two in mind if you ever have to do this. But a lot of these guns do have decockers and allow you to do it safely. If your thumb slips, it's not good. Now we have gun myths. A couple of gun myths, 45 ACP and stopping power. So kinetic energy transfer is a real thing. We talked about it when we talked about the hollow point bullets. A larger bullet expanding and stopping more quickly can expend, a lot of energy in a shorter period of time. However, this amount of energy required to stop someone's motion is massive, and no handgun round can do it. No handgun round can stop someone dead in their tracks unless, you kill them. Silencers are also not silent. Silencers don't suppress the sound of gunshot totally. They're still very loud. There's the sound of the action. A lot of suppressors don't, slow the bullet down to subsonic speeds. And even if they do, there still might be the crack. So another thing to know. Section 4, basic operation. So we've got some videos to show you to familiarize you with some of the common platforms in use, at least in the US. So first we've got the AR-15 video. All these are done by members. AR-15 is semi-automatic rifle, usually chambered in 5.56 by 45 or 223 Remington. Then we've got the Glock video and Glock derivatives, striker-fired semi-automatic, got a hammer-fired semi-automatic, pump-action shotgun, a bolt-action rifle. We've got a revolver video, and we've got a newly added AK video. It's the most common semi-automatic rifle, basically everywhere else in the world. They're not super common here. I might say they're building in popularity a little bit, but they're usually chambered in 7.62 by 39 or 5.45 by 39. So what I will do is cue those up and then let you watch them, and we can go from there.
I'm talking about basic operation of an AR pattern rifle. Obviously, anytime handling firearms, before we start operating anything, we're going to make sure that the firearm's pointed in a safe direction, but we're also going to make sure that the firearm's clear. So, on AR pattern rifles, here's the safety selector, by the way. When the hammer is down, it's not cocked, you normally won't be able to put it into the safe position. It'll be stuck in fire. That's normal. So I'm going to pull the charging handle back. See, there's no magazine in, nothing in the chamber. Release. I'm going to put it in safe. And for this demonstration, I'm using dummy rounds. Anytime you're going to be doing dry fires, it's important not to have ammunition, live ammunition, anywhere near the firearm for safety purposes. Again, these are dummy rounds. There's no primers. So loading an AR pattern magazine, you just simply push it in from the top. It's different than a traditional handgun magazine where they're loaded in from the front. Just push them in from the top like that. So again, firearm is in safe. Take the magazine, insert it into the mag well. and going to pull the charging handle all the way back. There's a small catch there that we're going to select. Release. And a round should have been stripped off the magazine into the chamber. I'll do that. You can see there it is. Then, when you are ready to fire, you can use your thumb to flip the safety selector from the safe to the fire position. Fire. Fire the cycle. Eject the spent round. Strip the next round off the magazine. Trigger resets. Fire again. Once the magazine is empty, the bolt will lock back. You then press this button, which is the magazine release. Drop the magazine free. Grab a fresh magazine. I'm just going to put my W round back in there. Insert it into the magazine well. And this time, instead of using the charging handle, I'm just going to use the bolt release, which is that paddle-looking lever right there. So you press this, the bolt's just released, and you're now ready to fire again. It's also not a bad idea when you're doing mag changes, like when you're at the range or something, to put it on safe between mag changes. So now you can resume firing. And when you're empty, the bolt will again lock back. Now, to take down the firearm, such as for cleaning or otherwise, there's 2 takedown pins on the bottom. Excuse me, on the bottom receiver there. It's one in the rear and one in the front. You don't have to remove both for basic cleaning. You can just remove the rear. When removing the rear, just again, to demonstrate, you push it from this side. And from the other side, you can kind of grab underneath and pull. They won't come all the way out. And it hinges apart like that. Again, you can see like this, it's not necessary to remove the front, but I'm going to for the sake of easier demonstration. You then can use the charging handle to start pulling the bolt back. I typically only pull it back part way like this, and then grab the bolt and pull it out from there. If you do wish to remove the charging handle, it will come out part way and then drop down. You can then run a bore swab through, clean your bolt, and when reinserting the bolt, you want to make sure that in the front, well, this whole piece is the bolt carrier group. Make sure the bolt itself is in the forward position. As you can see, it rotates a little bit. You want it in the forward position like that. First thing that we're going to do is reinsert the charging handle. There's a small cutout in there, in the groove in the top for this keyed portion right there to slide into. So I'm just going to get it started until it drops in again. Then put it about halfway in. Then take the bolt itself, the gas key on the top there, that's that tube, will roughly line up with the underside of the charging handle like that. And then everything slides all the way in. So we're going to make sure everything's flush here. Line up our front pivot pin there, takedown pin. And then the rear. Roll back together. Quick function check. Bolt seems to function. Empty magazine. Bolt locks back in an empty magazine. Magazine drops. Mag release. Or press that paddle. Safety operates. And again, I'm going to go ahead and dry fire it. Helps if the safety is off. And we're good to go.
All right, that was our AR-15 video. Now we can move on to the striker fired video.
This is a semi-automatic striker fire pistol. The rounds are held in a magazine in the bottom of the pistol. To remove the magazine, operate the magazine release button or lever. Striker fire pistols often do not have external safeties. meaning that when a round is in the chamber, the pistol is always ready to fire. Since striker fire pistols do not have hammers, there's no way to manually cock the pistol. To prepare the pistol, you pull back the slide. There also may be no indication when the striker is primed. This model has the indication of the red dot in the back. Without a hammer, there is no way to decock a striker fire pistol, unless the pistol has a decocker built into it. This one does. A button on the top. To load a striker fire pistol, like with a hammer fire, you would insert the magazine and then pull back the slide. If the pistol is empty or it encounters a malfunction while firing, the slide will lock open. To solve this, you remove the magazine and then press the slide release lever.
And now we have our hammer fired video.
This is a semi-automatic hammer-fired pistol. Semi-auto pistols typically hold between 10 and 17 rounds. The rounds are held in a magazine at the bottom of the pistol. To remove the magazine, you press the magazine release button on the side of the pistol. Semi-auto pistols may also have an external safety. That is a button or a lever on the side of the pistol that when on will prevent the pistol from firing. This one is on, meaning that if I pull the trigger, nothing will happen. If I were to turn the safety off and then pull the trigger, the pistol will attempt to fire. To load a semi-automatic pistol, you need to insert the magazine and then pull back the slide to load the first round into the chamber. At this point, the pistol is ready to fire. Like a revolver, you can also pull back the hammer to make the trigger lighter and easier to use. Unlike a revolver, some semi-auto pistols have a decocker, meaning there is a button or lever you can press to lower the hammer without the pistol firing. In this case, the decocker is also the safety. So when I turn on the safety, the hammer will lower, but the pistol will not fire. To unload a semi-auto pistol, you remove the magazine, and also be sure to remove the round in the chamber. You can do that by pulling back the slide. When the pistol is empty after firing, the slide usually stays open, like this. In this case, you can close the slide again by pressing the slide release button. Also, when the slide is open, you can load in the magazine and then press the slide release button. This loads a round into the chamber, meaning that with the safety off, you can fire the pistol without needing to pull back the slide.
Next up, we have the pump action shotgun video.
This short video is going to explain the basics of operating a pump-action firearm. Please note that anything done in front of this white background is being done with spent shell casings, not actual live rounds, for the purposes of demonstration. The basic idea is that it's called a pump action because in order to cycle a new round into the chamber, you have to do this, kind of pumping it. What this does is it takes a round from this tube, which stores additional rounds inside of it, pulls it out, and pops it up into the chamber, ready to be fired. To load one of these, first pull the slide back. Then take a round and put it into the chamber, like so, and push the slide forward again. Then engage the safety. On this particular gun, it's a crossbolt safety in front of the trigger that you push like so, and now the trigger will not actuate. Then additional rounds are put into the tube underneath it like this. I suggest taking the tip of your thumb and pushing it in until it clicks. Sometimes if you use your whole thumb, what will happen is it'll get caught on the lip of this lever here. Put as many rounds in as the tube will hold, and you're ready to go. Then, once you're ready, you have your target in focus, you're sure of what's beyond it, the muzzle's in a safe direction, all that stuff. Take your shot. Well, first you have to disengage the safety. Disengage the safety, take your shot, then pull the slide all the way back and push it all the way forward. The reason that it's important to make sure that you pull the slide back all the way and push it forward all the way is because if you don't, the gun could jam. What happens most of the time is people will short stroke it, which is exactly what it sounds like. And what happens then, most of the time, is the round won't eject properly and you'll get something that looks like this. So the number one rule, again, is make sure that you're pulling the slide back all the way and pushing it forward all the way, every time. What can happen, too, is, especially with guns that have a high amount of recoil, like shotguns tend to, as soon as you pull the trigger on this, the slide unlocks. Right? Now, it's locked in position until you pull the trigger again, and a lot of guns will have a slide release button. On this kit, on this one, it's right here, that lets you rack the slide again. But as soon as you pull the trigger, the slide releases. Well, what also happens when you pull the trigger is you fire around, the gun moves a bit, and the slide can kind of move backwards a little bit on its own. I'll go outside and demonstrate that with a live round right now. So as you saw, the gun slide moved back on its own a little bit. And so the pulling it back isn't going to travel as far as you might think, and it might trip you up and you might not. So just make sure you go all the way back, all the way forward every time. And the best way to accomplish that is just practice. Now, if the gun does jam or something else unusual happens, keep the muzzle pointed downrange, pull the slide back if you can, and just look and see what's going on here. A lot of times it'll just be, like I said, a failure to eject, and you can just reach in, pull out the round, and push the slide forward again and be on your way.
Okay, next we've got our bolt action video.
This is a short and simple video explaining the basics of how to use a bolt action rifle. The gist of it is most bolt action rifles will have a magazine under them of some sort, similar to, if I can get it out, this one, which is currently unloaded for the purposes of demonstration. You'll put in your rounds into the magazine, put them up, and then the action of cycling looks like this. You'll pull the bolt up like this, pull it back, then push it forward again, which would chamber a new round if this was loaded, and flick it down like that. Then if you're planning on just carrying it around for hunting or something, you would put the gun on safe. Most bolt action rifles have a little lever right here, which I've made comically large letters indicating. And you pull this back to safe, and now the trigger will not actuate. To fire, make sure that your target is valid, to make sure that you're following the 4 rules and such. Push the safety lever forward and pull the trigger. to chamber a new round, you would do the same thing. This, then this, and then that. That's pretty much all there is to it. Now, if you have a single shot bolt action, that is, it doesn't have a magazine, then what you would do is pull it up, pull it back, then manually put in a new round, the round in, put it forward, push it down, put it on safe, and you're ready to go. Field stripping one of these is extraordinarily simple. On most bolt actions, there will be a button or a lever which you can use to completely remove the bolt from the gun. I'll show you it on this one. First, we flip it up and pull it back. Then we push this button and the bolt just comes out. From here, you can lubricate and clean all of the important bits of the gun, including inside the chamber, inside up into the action, and all the other good stuff. And that's the basics.
Okay, now we have our revolver video.
This is a revolver. Revolvers usually hold 6 rounds in a revolving cylinder. To open that cylinder, operate the button on the side of the frame. Once the cylinder is open, you can remove the rounds with the ejection rod, and you can add more rounds to reload the gun. Revolvers typically do not have safeties. To fire it, you simply pull the trigger. You can also pull back the hammer yourself and make the trigger lighter to fire. If the hammer is back and you want to lower the hammer without firing the gun or decocking, simply hold down the hammer and then pull the trigger, slowly lowering the hammer back.
All right, and last but not least, we have our AK platform video.
Hi, welcome to the Michigan Socialist Rifle Association's Firearms 101. Today we're going to be talking about my favorite firearm, the Kalashnikov pattern rifle. So first and foremost, before we do anything else, we're going to ensure that the firearm is safe and unloaded. To do so, we're going to remove the magazine and show that the firearm is unloaded. All Kalashnikov pattern rifles, of course, use this basic safety lever here. Up being the safe position, as it will not allow for the hammer to be released and the bolt to come back. It literally hits the lever. Again, of course, we are safe and unloaded. Down is the fire position. On a semi-automatic rifle, all the way down is semi-automatic fire. Should this be a burst or a full auto, which it is not, there are also other places in between safe and fire. But, again, semi-auto. And I'm going to pull the trigger here, and you're actually going to see the hammer come up right there. What that does is that strikes a firing pin in the bolt, which is in the bolt carrier, which is attached to the gas tube. The round goes down the barrel. Gas comes up, pushes the piston back through the gas tube here, which drives the piston and the bolt carrier back, like so. That resets the trigger, ejects the last round, and as it comes forward, strips another round off of the magazine, loading it into the chamber. Loading and reloading this rifle takes a little bit of time, some patience, and a lot of muscle memory. There's a few basic ways to do so. Essentially, each magazine has 2 lugs on it. One on the front to help guide it into the receiver and hold it in place, and one on the back that actually holds on to a spring-loaded magazine release button here. to load it into place, you're going to basically tuck it under your arm, hold it tight to your body. You can take that locking lug into the hole in the receiver. There's kind of a sweet spot. Might take you a second to find it. Once you have it, rock it straight back, and you can see that the magazine release will actually move back and forth, locking into place. Unloading the rifle is just as simple. And the basic ways that you can do this are, of course, pull this forwards, magazine goes out, next magazine, up, in. A couple other kind of sillier ways, of course. You really want to get into the nitty-gritty of it, is the tactical reload, where you would actually hold another magazine like so. It's just going to be that quick switch back and forth over and over again. You kind of hold it a little off center, and I always find it's easier to hold the magazines closer to the bottom. You're going to come up like so, release, rock it in, off, like so. Another way is you actually literally just smack it out of place. You're going to be hitting the magazine release with the magazine itself that you have next up, knocking this out of the way and loading from there. Another way, of course, this is kind of the Russian way, where you are going to lean forwards, pressing the magazine release and rocking the rifle, knocking it out of place. Then come up with your next one, and there you go. A little bit of a quirkier way is what's known as the Iraqi reload. This one definitely takes some practice. I'm still not super good at it, so excuse any mess-ups here. But essentially what happens is after you fire your last round, you grab a hold of the charging handle on the bolt, and holding it tight against your shoulder, you're going to pull straight back. You now have the entire weight of the rifle in your shoulder. Then do the reload of your choice. Now when you let go of the charging handle, it's going to drop the next round into the chamber. Like so, ready to fire. Remove the magazine. Remove the dust cover. Press this button. Dust cover comes off. Pull the recoil spring. Pull it back out of the trunnion. Pull it out. It's just a spring. Remove the bolt. Safety down. Pull back the charging handle. All the way. Comes right out. Here's the piston. Like so. Give it a little smack. There we have it. Perform a quick function test to make sure that everything is back in where it needs to be. Spring tension is good. And you're all set.
All right, that was our AK video. So, little my 2 cents, I guess, on the AK and the AR videos. When you disassemble both of those rifles, you're going to want to make sure that the hammer is down or in the cocked position, or else you will not be able to pull your bolt carrier group out. So that's just, something there. Okay, cleaning and oiling. Like I had mentioned before, with the controlled humidity safes, guns, firearms, they are machines. They need to be kept free of rust, and they also need to be lubricated. It's a moving, it's got a lot of moving parts. It's a lot of metal on metal contact. So certain parts need to be lubed and oiled to make sure that everything functions like it should. Carbon buildup from firing, dirt, corrosion will build up and stop it from working, and it can cause some dangerous malfunctions, such as slam firing. This is especially prevalent in the SKS rifle, where the firing pin isn't under any sort of spring tension one way or the other. Gunk can get in there and stick it, I guess, in the forward position so that when the bolt loads a new round, the firing pin is already forward. And so what it does is it automatically fires around without you having to pull the trigger. Very not good. It can turn your semi-automatic rifle into a fully automatic rifle, but one that you don't control, which is very bad. Parts diagrams are very helpful if you're not sure exactly where to lube. And then storage. We've mentioned it a couple times now, humidity is the enemy. There are dehumidifying gun safes. You can get a simple desiccant packet, or you can install your own dehumidifying devices. And that is it. I hope my rambling wasn't too much to bear. This is a long stream, I know. Thank you for sticking around if you did stick around through the whole thing. We have a few social media platforms on Twitter. We're at rifle_MI, Facebook at MI Socialist RA, and Instagram at Michigan.SRA. We are going to try to do some other courses in the works. We have Gardening 101, we have First Aid 101, we've got a few other things. So hopefully it won't be month after month of Firearms 101. Hopefully we can get this uploaded to YouTube and have it stick around in case anyone ever wants to come back and reference it.